Welcome to Inspirational True Stories. What if the most profound moments in life were hidden in the hustle and bustle of a busy city street? Among the dazzling neon lights, hurried footsteps, and fragmented conversations, there exists a melody, a voice so pure that it makes the world pause. This is the story of a woman rediscovering her heart, a boy whose dreams defy all odds, and an unexpected connection that changed their lives forever. Are you ready to hear the song of the street? If you are, comment "ready" and let's dive into the story together. The city pulsed with life as evening descended. Neon signs flickered above crowded sidewalks, the hum of car engines mixed with snippets of conversation, and the aroma of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart lingered in the chilly air. Among the chaos, a child's voice soared, a melody so pure it seemed to still the whirlwind of city life for fleeting moments. Isaiah stood on the corner, his sneakers worn thin and his jacket several sizes too large. His tattered appearance belied the energy radiating from his performance. With eyes closed, he sang with unbridled joy, his voice weaving a tale of hope and innocence. Passers-by barely spared him a glance, hurrying to their destinations, their expressions masked by the weight of their own lives. Yet Isaiah sang on, as though each note could sprinkle a fragment of happiness upon a world too distracted to notice. A sleek black car pulled up a block away, and from it stepped Miriam and Thomas. She was elegance personified, her emerald green dress shimmering under the streetlights, while Thomas cut a sharp figure in his tailored suit. They walked briskly, her heels clicking against the pavement, heading toward the grand ballroom hosting a charity gala for which they were already running late. As they passed Isaiah, Miriam's steps faltered. The boy's voice caught her attention, his song tugging at something she couldn't name. She slowed, tilting her head to listen more closely. "Do you hear him?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. Thomas glanced over his shoulder briefly. "It's just a kid singing," he replied, his tone dismissive. "We're late." Miriam didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the boy, whose face lit up as he caught her gaze, unaware of her husband's impatience. "He's different," she said quietly. Thomas sighed, tugging at her arm. "A street kid, Miriam. There's nothing special about this. Let's go." But she didn't budge. Her gaze remained on Isaiah, captivated by the sincerity in his song and the way it seemed to pierce through the cold indifference of the crowd. Thomas frowned. "Oh, you can't be serious. We're already running behind and everyone's waiting for us." "I can't leave," she murmured, her voice tinged with an emotion Thomas couldn't quite place. "Just go ahead. I'll catch up." He stared at her for a moment, incredulous, before shaking his head and walking off toward the gala, muttering under his breath about priorities. Miriam barely noticed. She approached Isaiah, who had paused mid-song as she drew near. "Hi," he greeted her with a grin, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "You have a beautiful voice." Miriam blinked, startled. Thank you, but it's your voice that's beautiful. Why do you sing out here?" Isaiah's smile widened. "I sing because I love it. I want to make people smile." The simplicity of his answer hit her like a jolt. There was no calculation in his words, no expectation, just a boy with a song and a dream, to bring joy to strangers. She crouched down so they were at eye level. "Don't you get cold? Or hungry?" "Sometimes," Isaiah admitted with a shrug. But it's okay, I've got my music, and people sometimes give me food or coins. I save the coins for my dream." "Your dream?" she echoed. "To go to music school someday," he said, his eyes sparkling with hope. "I want to learn everything about singing and make big songs that everyone can hear." Miriam's chest tightened. His words unearthed a long-forgotten memory, an echo of a dream she once had but abandoned long ago. As she gazed at him, she felt a strange connection, as though his song had reached a part of her she thought was gone forever. "Do your parents know you're out here?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop herself. Isaiah's smile faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly recovered. "I'm okay," he said evasively. "They're busy. A lot." Miriam sensed the half-truth but didn't press him. Instead, she reached into her evening clutch and pulled out a $20 bill, pressing it into his small, calloused hand. "Here, for your dream." Isaiah's eyes widened. "Wow. Thank you, ma'am. This will help a lot." For a moment, she thought about leaving. Thomas would undoubtedly be annoyed with her tardiness, and the evening's events required her presence. But something about Isaiah made it impossible to walk away. She stayed, leaning against a nearby lamppost, listening as he started a new song, this one slower, filled with bittersweet notes that seemed to carry the weight of a life far too heavy for someone his age. "You're really good," she said when he finished. "Have you ever sung for anyone official?" Isaiah's brow furrowed in confusion. "Official?" "You know," she clarified. "People who could help you get into music school." He shook his head, his curls bouncing. "Nope, just here. This is my stage." Miriam smiled at the innocence in his answer, but her heart ached. "What if I could help you? Would you like that?" "Help me?" he asked, his expression curious but cautious. "I know people who could hear you sing," she said carefully. "People who might help you with your dream." Isaiah's face lit up with excitement, but then doubt clouded his features. Are you sure? I'm just a kid, not on the street." "You're more than that," she assured him. "You're a star, Isaiah, and stars deserve to shine." For the first time, the bustling city seemed to fade into the background. The sound of honking cars and rushing footsteps dulled, leaving just the two of them, a woman in an elegant gown and a boy with a dream, sharing a moment that neither would forget. As she stood to leave, Isaiah called after her, "Will you come back?" Miriam hesitated, then smiled. "Yes, Isaiah, I come back. Keep singing." She turned and began walking in the direction of the gala, her steps slower than before, her mind churning with thoughts she couldn't quite organize. Behind her, Isaiah's voice soared once more, carrying through the night, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of connection could alter the course of a life. Thomas returned, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached Miriam, who still stood transfixed near Isaiah. His expression was tight with frustration, the type of restrained annoyance that usually ensured others fell in line. Tonight, however, it faltered in the face of Miriam's quiet defiance. "Miriam," he began, keeping his voice low as though embarrassed by the situation. "What are you doing? We need to go. People are waiting for us." Miriam didn't turn right away, her eyes still fixed on Isaiah, who had resumed singing. The boy's voice carried effortlessly through the night, weaving between the sounds of the city like a thread of pure gold. It wasn't just his voice, though. It was the emotion behind it, the vulnerability that tugged at something deep within her. She finally turned, her face soft but resolute. "I'm staying, Thomas," she said simply. He frowned, glancing at his watch for effect. "We're already late. The gala is important. These are people we need to stay in good standing with. And you're... what? Lingering in the cold with a street performer?" "This isn't just a street performer," Miriam said, her voice steady. "This is important." Thomas's frustration deepened, his patience clearly thinning. "This isn't us, Miriam." She paused at that, her brow furrowing slightly. Then She met his gaze with a clarity he hadn't seen in years. Maybe it should be. Maybe this is what matters, Thomas. Not the gala, not the business, just this. Thomas looked genuinely taken aback for a moment. He opened his mouth to respond, but thought better of it, running a hand through his neatly combed hair instead. "I don't get it," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "That's because you're not listening, huh?" Miriam said softly, turning back to Isaiah. Isaiah had stopped singing mid-verse, watching the two adults with a mix of curiosity and concern. His big brown eyes flicked between them, taking in the tension, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the cold night air. "Are you sad?" he asked, his voice gentle, cutting through the charged silence. Miriam blinked, startled by the directness of the question. She crouched down to his level again, a faint smile touching her lips. "No," she said slowly. "Just remembering someone I loved." Isaiah tilted his head, his small hands clutching the neck of his battered guitar. "Shh, did they sing too?" Her smile wavered and she nodded. "Yes, he did, my brother. He used to sing all the time." Isaiah's face lit up with genuine interest. "What did he sing?" Miriam hesitated, the memory hovering just beyond reach, reluctant to surface. But then, as Isaiah began plucking out the first few notes of his next song, it hit her like a jolt. The melody was unmistakable, the lyrics rising with a clarity that made her chest tighten. "Keep your light shining, even in the dark." Isaiah's voice rang out, soft but unwavering. Miriam froze, her breath catching as she was transported back in time. She could see her younger self sitting in the dimly lit living room of her childhood home. Her brother Daniel sat beside her, strumming his guitar. His voice, warm and full of life, filled the space with the same song. It had been his favorite, his mantra during the tough times their family had endured. She had forgotten, or rather, she had buried it so deep that it no longer felt like hers to remember, and yet here it was, brought to life again by a boy who couldn't have known its significance. The weight of years pressed down on her, but so did something else, the unmistakable lightness of that memory, of a time when hope seemed so much closer, so tangible. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Isaiah finished the song, looking at her expectantly. "Do you like it?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent hope. Miriam nodded, her throat tight. "It's beautiful." Thomas, who had been watching the scene unfold with increasing discomfort, shifted on his feet. "Miriam!" he said, his voice sharp enough to draw her attention. "We really need to go." She stood slowly, turning to face him. "Go if you want to, Thomas. I'm not ready to leave." He stared at her, clearly torn between pressing the issue and walking away. "What's going on with you?" he finally asked. "You're acting like a completely different person." "Maybe I am," she said, surprising even herself with the admission. "Or maybe I'm just remembering who I used to be." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but the sincerity in her voice stopped him. He sighed heavily, throwing his hands up in defeat. "Fine. Do whatever you want." He turned and walked back toward the direction of the gala, his figure disappearing into the crowd. Miriam exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave her shoulders. She turned back to Isaiah, who was watching her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked hesitantly. "No, Isaiah," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You've done everything right." He smiled, his face brightening. "Can I sing another one for you?" "Please do," she said, sitting down on the edge of the curb, no longer caring about the cold seeping through her elegant dress. Isaiah began another song, this one faster, filled with a kind of hopeful energy that seemed to bubble over with each note. As he sang, Miriam found herself clapping along, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. Passers-by began to slow, some even stopping to listen. A few tossed coins into the small box Isaiah had set out, while others simply stood and enjoyed the moment. For a little while, the world seemed smaller, more intimate. The city's chaos faded into the background, replaced by the pure, unfiltered joy of a boy and his song. Miriam felt something stir deep within her, a sense of purpose, a desire to do something, to make a difference, no matter how small. When Isaiah finished, the small crowd that had gathered clapped and cheered. He grinned widely, his cheeks flushed with pride. Miriam joined in the applause, her heart full. "You're amazing, Isaiah," she said, as the crowd began to disperse. "Don't ever stop singing." "I won't," he promised, his voice firm. Miriam reached into her clutch again, pulling out a business card. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing against his cold, calloused hands. "This is my number. If you ever need anything at all, call me, okay?" Isaiah took the card carefully, holding it as though it were a treasure. "I will. Thank you, ma'am." "Call me Miriam," she said with a smile. As she stood to leave, Isaiah's voice stopped her once more. "Will you come back tomorrow?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Isaiah, I'll come back." She walked away slowly, her mind awhirl with thoughts and emotions she couldn't quite sort out. Behind her, Isaiah's voice rose again, cutting through the cold night air. This time, though, it wasn't just a song. It was a promise, a reminder that light, no matter how small, could shine through the darkest of times. The night air grew colder, wrapping itself around Miriam as she stood by Isaiah's makeshift stage on the street corner. The distant hum of city life continued. Cars honking, snippets of laughter, and hurried footsteps. But none of it felt as loud as the tension now crackling between her and Thomas. Thomas stood a few feet away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His patience, already worn thin, had finally snapped. His face, always so composed, was a mask of frustration and disbelief. "This is insane, Miriam," he said, his voice barely controlled. "You're throwing away everything we've built. For what? A random street kid?" Miriam turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. "It's not about throwing anything away, Thomas. It's about realizing what really matters." "What matters," he snapped, "is being at that gala. Those people in there, the ones we're late for, they're the ones who can make or break us, not some kid singing on the street." Miriam shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "That's where you're wrong. Isaiah reminded me of something I've lost, something I buried so deep I forgot it was ever there." Thomas threw his hands up in exasperation. You're talking in riddles, Miriam. I don't understand any of this." "I know you don't," she said quietly, her gaze steady. "And maybe that's the problem." Her words landed like a blow, and Thomas recoiled slightly. "The problem? The problem is you've been acting like someone I don't recognize tonight. First you refused to leave this street corner, and now you're accusing me of being the problem." Miriam sighed, the weight of years of unspoken truths pressing down on her shoulders. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Thomas. I'm just realizing that we've been so focused on appearances, on success, that we've forgotten what it means to actually feel, to connect." Thomas stared at her, his frustration now mingled with confusion. "This isn't about us. It's about you and whatever this moment is." "Yes, it is about me," she admitted. "For the first time in years, I'm letting myself feel something real. Isaiah's song brought me back to a part of myself I thought I'd lost forever." Thomas shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "This is ridiculous. I'm going to the gala. You can stay here and play savior if you want, but don't expect me to wait around for this, whatever this is." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the distance. Miriam watched him go, her heart heavy, but her resolve unwavering. She could have chased after him, apologized, smoothed things over like she had so many times before. But this time was different. This time, she stayed. Isaiah's small voice broke through her thoughts. "Did I do something wrong?" Miriam turned back to him, her face softening. "No, Isaiah, you've done everything right." He smiled, but it was tinged with uncertainty. "Your husband seemed really mad." Miriam knelt down so she was eye level with him, her voice gentle. "Don't worry about him. This isn't your fault. You've reminded me of something I needed to remember." Isaiah tilted his head, his curiosity evident. "What did I remind you of?" Miriam hesitated, searching for the right words. "You reminded me of the joy I used to feel when I sang. My brother used to sing the same song you did tonight. It was his favorite. He believed that no matter how dark things got, you had to keep your light shining." Isaiah's eyes lit up. "You're a singer too. You just need to let it out." His words, so simple yet so profound, struck a chord deep within her. She had been a singer once, a long time ago. Music had been her passion, her sanctuary, but life had a way of dimming dreams, of burying them beneath responsibilities and expectations. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped singing. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. Isaiah grinned, his enthusiasm infectious. "Sing with me, then." Miriam blinked, startled. What? Oh, I don't think—" "Come on," he urged, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "You said your brother used to sing. You know the song, right?" "I do," she admitted, her heart racing at the thought. "Then sing it with me," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Miriam hesitated for a moment longer, the weight of years of silence pressing against her. But then she looked at Isaiah, his face so full of hope, and something shifted inside her. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Okay, let's do it." Isaiah's grin widened as he adjusted his guitar. He began to play the familiar melody, his fingers dancing over the strings with ease. Miriam took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly as she joined him on the first verse. "Keep your lights shining even in the dark." Her voice wavered at first, rusty from years of disuse, but as the song went on, it grew stronger, steadier. Isaiah's voice harmonized with hers, and together they created something beautiful. A duet that seemed to transcend the noise of the city around them. Passers-by began to stop and listen, drawn by the unexpected performance. Some clapped along, while others pulled out their phones to record the moment. Miriam felt the warmth of their attention, but more than that, she felt the warmth of her own voice, of the music that had been buried inside her for so long. When the song ended, the small crowd erupted into applause. Isaiah beamed, his joy radiating outward like sunlight. Miriam couldn't help but laugh, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in far too long. "You're amazing," Isaiah said, his admiration genuine. "See, I told you could do it." Miriam reached out and ruffled his hair, her heart full. "Thank you, Isaiah. You reminded me of something I forgot. Something I didn't even realize I needed." "What's that?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "It's okay to let go," she said softly. To feel. To be vulnerable, to find joy in the simple things." Isaiah grinned. "You're pretty cool, you know that?" She laughed again, shaking her head. "You're the cool one, Isaiah." The moment felt like a turning point, a line drawn between the life Miriam had lived up until now and the life she could choose moving forward. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it. As the crowd began to disperse, Miriam pulled Isaiah into a gentle hug. "Don't ever stop singing," she whispered. "You have a gift, and the world needs your light." Isaiah hugged her back, his small arms warm and comforting. "I won't, and you shouldn't stop either." She pulled back, her smile soft but determined. "Maybe I won't." As they stood there together, the city's noise seemed to fade, leaving only the echoes of their song lingering in the crisp night air. It wasn't just a duet, it was a promise, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could find a way to shine. The chill of the night began to seep deeper into Miriam's bones, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was still humming with the song she and Isaiah had shared. The boy was busy packing his guitar into a worn case when a woman approached from the opposite side of the street. Her steps were quick yet measured, and though her posture spoke of exhaustion, her face lit up the moment she saw Isaiah. "Mom!" Isaiah called, running to meet her. The woman knelt down, wrapping him in a tight embrace, before standing and brushing stray curls from his forehead. She appeared to be in her late 30s, with dark circles under her eyes and lines etched into her face that spoke of long days and sleepless nights. Yet there was warmth in her gaze, a fierce, protective love that radiated from her as she held her son close. Miriam stepped forward, suddenly feeling like an intruder on such an intimate moment. The woman noticed her and offered a polite, slightly wary smile. "I'm sorry if he was bothering you," she said quickly, her voice gentle but tinged with apology. "He gets carried away when he sings." "Not at all," Miriam said, shaking her head. "He's extraordinary. His voice, it's like nothing I've ever heard." The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. He loves to sing. It's all he ever talks about." She glanced down at Isaiah, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Sometimes I wish he didn't spend so much time out here, but he says it's his stage." "It is, Mom," Isaiah piped up, his grin wide. "And tonight, I got to sing with Miriam." The woman's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You sang with him?" she asked, her gaze shifting to Miriam. Miriam nodded, smiling. "I did. He has a way of drawing people in. I couldn't say no." The woman chuckled softly, a sound filled with both pride and fatigue. "That's Isaiah for you. He has a way of touching people's hearts." She paused, studying Miriam for a moment. "Thank you for staying with him. It means more than you know." Miriam hesitated, then said, He reminded me of what's truly important. I think I needed that." The woman's expression softened. "I understand. He reminds me of that every day. No matter how hard things get, he finds a way to make it better." She sighed, brushing her fingers through Isaiah's hair. "I just want to give him a real chance, to follow his dreams." Miriam's chest tightened as she looked at the woman, seeing the weight she carried. Her clothes were clean but threadbare, and the way she held herself spoke of someone who worked tirelessly to provide for her child. Miriam realized how many times she had walked past people like this woman and her son without a second thought. Yet now, standing here, it was impossible not to see the love and resilience that bound them together. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her business card, handing it to Isaiah's mother. "If there's anything I can do to help him, please don't hesitate to call me." The woman took the card, her eyes widening slightly as she read it. "Miriam Hensley," she said, recognizing the name. "You're with Hensley Enterprises?" "Yes," Miriam said, her voice gentle, "but tonight I'm just someone who believes in your son." Tears glistened in the woman's eyes as she clutched the card tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." Miriam smiled softly. "I think I do." As she watched Isaiah and his mother walk away, their silhouettes blending into the night, Miriam felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. For so long she had been chasing something she couldn't even name. Success, approval, a sense of worth. But tonight, a boy with a song and a dream had reminded her of what she truly needed: connection, meaning, and the courage to embrace both. At the gala, Thomas found himself distracted. The grand ballroom was filled with glittering chandeliers, well-dressed attendees, and the hum of polite conversation. Waiters moved seamlessly through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. By all accounts, it was a successful event. Yet Thomas couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. He had done everything right, arrived on time, mingled with the right people, and exchanged pleasantries with potential partners. But as the evening wore on, his thoughts drifted back to Miriam and her unexpected connection to the boy. Her words echoed in his mind, each one carving deeper into the walls he had built around himself. Maybe this is what matters. Not the gala, not the business, just this. He glanced around the room, taking in the polished smiles and practiced laughter. For the first time, it all felt hollow. He had spent years chasing success, building an empire, and securing their place among the city's elite. But what had it cost them? When was the last time they had done something simply because it brought them joy? The question gnawed at him, its weight growing heavier with each passing minute. By the time the evening wound down, Thomas could barely stand to stay another moment. He excused himself quietly, slipping out into the crisp night air. Thomas wandered through the city streets, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. The air was cool against his face, carrying with it the distant sounds of traffic and nightlife. He walked aimlessly, letting his thoughts unravel as he replayed the evening in his mind. He passed a group of street performers on a busy corner, their lively music drawing a small crowd. For a moment, he paused, watching them play. Their faces were alight with enthusiasm, their music filled with an energy that seemed to pulse through the crowd. Thomas found himself captivated, not by the precision of their performance, but by the raw, unfiltered joy that radiated from them. As he stood there, he thought of Miriam, of the way her face had softened when she spoke about the boy, of the light in her eyes as she stood rooted to that street corner, defying everything they had built together. It wasn't defiance, he realized. It was rediscovery. She had found something he hadn't even known she was searching for. "What if I've been missing it too?" he murmured to himself, the words barely audible over the music. He stayed for a while, listening to the performers, their melodies stirring something within him. When he finally turned to leave, he felt lighter, as though a crack had formed in the armor he had spent years constructing. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When Thomas returned home, the apartment was dark, except for the faint glow of a lamp in the living room. Miriam was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, a distant look in her eyes. She turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. "You're back," she said softly. "I am Taja," he replied, shrugging off his coat and draping it over a chair. He hesitated before sitting down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "How was Isaiah?" Miriam's face softened at the mention of the boy. "He's incredible," she said simply, "and his mother, she's doing everything she can to give him a chance." Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what matters." "And?" she prompted gently. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "And I think you're right. We've been so caught up in chasing the next thing, the next success, that we forgot what it feels like to just be." Miriam's expression wavered, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "So what do we do now?" Thomas leaned back, exhaling deeply. I don't know, but maybe we start by listening, by letting ourselves feel again. Miriam smiled, small but genuine. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning, and for the first time in a long time it felt like enough. The morning air carried a gentle chill, but the sun's rays painted the city in soft hues of gold. Miriam walked slowly along the quiet street, a bouquet of daisies cradled in her arms. Each step felt purposeful, her mind replaying the melody Isaiah had sung the night before. The daisies were for Daniel, her late brother. They had been his favorite, simple yet resilient, just like the song he used to sing. She reached the entrance to their building, hesitating briefly before stepping inside. Her thoughts swirled as she considered what waited for her upstairs. The evening with Isaiah and his mother had brought clarity, but it had also opened a floodgate of emotions she had long suppressed. And then there was Thomas, her husband, her partner, whose silence last night had left her unsure of where they now stood. When she entered the apartment, she found Thomas sitting on the edge of the couch, his posture unusually tense. He looked up as she closed the door, his eyes softening at the sight of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. "You're back," he said quietly, his voice tinged with something unfamiliar, vulnerability. "I am," she replied, her tone equally gentle. She placed the daisies in a vase on the kitchen counter before turning to face him. "I wasn't sure you would be." Thomas gestured to the spot next to him. "Can we talk?" Miriam nodded, crossing the room to sit beside him. She folded her hands in her lap, bracing herself for whatever was to come. "I've been thinking," Thomas began, his voice steady but laced with hesitation, "about last night, and about what you said, and about us." Miriam tilted her head, her gaze searching his face. "And?" He let out a long breath, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I think I've been blind to a lot of things. You were right about how we've been living, about how disconnected we've become. I didn't see it before, but last night I couldn't stop thinking about it." Miriam's heart softened, though she kept her expression neutral. "What changed?" Thomas straightened, his eyes meeting hers. "After the gala, I went for a walk. I passed this group of street performers, and I stopped to listen. For a moment, it was like the rest of the world fell away, and all that mattered was the music. It reminded me of you, of what you were trying to tell me." He paused, his voice dropping. "I realized I've been so focused on building a life for us that I've forgotten to live it." His words hit her like a wave, both validating and overwhelming. Miriam swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "Thomas, I need more than this. I need to feel like what we're doing matters. Not just to the world, but to us. To me." Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I know. And I want to try, Miriam. For you. For us." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, nodding. "That means more than you know." For a moment they sat in silence, the unspoken tension between them beginning to ease. Miriam reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "Do you remember when we first started out? How everything felt so full of possibility?" Thomas smiled faintly. "I do. Back then, it wasn't about the money or the success. It was about making a difference, about building something meaningful. And somewhere along the way, we lost that," Miriam said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I don't want to lose it anymore." Thomas's grip on her hand tightened. "Neither do I." She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the daisies on the counter. "Last night, singing with Isaiah, it reminded me of Daniel, of how much he believed in finding joy, even in the smallest moments." Thomas followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. He was always good at that. Miriam smiled wistfully. He was. And I think I need to honor that. To find ways to bring more of that into our lives. Thomas looked at her, his expression resolute. Then let's do it, whatever it takes. Miriam turned to him, her eyes filled with hope. Let's make a promise, Thomas, to always take time to stop and listen, to find the moments that matter. He nodded, his voice firm. I promise. Always. In the weeks that followed, their lives began to shift. Miriam made a conscious effort to reconnect with the things that brought her joy. She reached out to a music teacher she had once admired, signing up for lessons to rediscover her voice. Thomas, too, found himself drawn to simpler pursuits. Long walks through the city, afternoons spent at small cafes, and evenings where they sat together talking about dreams they had long neglected. Miriam also kept her promise to Isaiah and his mother. She arranged for Isaiah to meet a music instructor, someone who could help him refine his raw talent. The boy's excitement was infectious, and Miriam found herself looking forward to their visits. One evening, as the city buzzed with its usual energy, Miriam and Thomas walked hand in hand toward the corner where Isaiah often sang. They found him there, his voice soaring above the noise, drawing a small crowd. His mother stood nearby, her pride evident in the way she watched her son. Miriam squeezed Thomas's hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "This is what matters," she said softly. Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on Isaiah. "It is." As they stood there, surrounded by strangers who had paused to listen, Miriam felt a profound sense of peace. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. Together, she and Thomas had found their way back to what truly mattered. A life filled with connection, purpose, and the courage to embrace the moments that made it all worthwhile. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. Miriam stirred, feeling a rare lightness in her chest. For the first time in years, she woke without the familiar weight of unfulfilled expectations pressing down on her. Instead, a quiet sense of purpose had settled in its place, fragile yet resolute. She slipped out of bed and padded to the window, gazing out at the city below. The streets were already alive with movement. Vendors setting up stalls, people rushing to work, and the distant hum of life carrying on. But today, Miriam saw it differently. Every sound, every face felt like a reminder of the interconnectedness she had rediscovered. Her thoughts drifted to Isaiah and his mother. Their resilience, their unshakable bond, had left a mark on her. She couldn't shake the image of Isaiah's wide, hopeful grin as he sang, or the quiet pride in his mother's eyes as she spoke of her son. Miriam knew she wanted to do more, needed to do more, not just for them, but for others like them. Lost in thought, she didn't hear Thomas approach until he spoke. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice still rough with sleep. Miriam turned, smiling at him. "Good morning." He walked over, leaning against the window frame beside her. For a moment they stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake. Finally, Thomas broke the quiet. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone careful, "about Isaiah, about what you said last night." Miriam tilted her head, studying him. "What about it?" "I want to help," he admitted, surprising even himself. "I know I've been reluctant to see things the way you do, but I can't stop thinking about that boy and his mother. They deserve more." Miriam's heart swelled, but she kept her voice steady. "What are you thinking?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We could start small, maybe sponsor music lessons for kids like Isaiah, kids with talent and drive but no way to develop it. We have the resources, and it feels like something that could actually make a difference." Her breath caught, a mixture of surprise and gratitude. You really mean that?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I do. I don't know what it'll look like yet, but I want to try. You've inspired me, Miriam. And so is that kid. The way he just sings, no matter who's watching or listening, it's brave." Miriam reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you, Thomas, that means everything to me." He squeezed her hand gently. "It's time we started building something that matters." Later that morning, they decided to take a walk through the park. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Couples strolled hand in hand, children played on the swings, and joggers weaved their way along the winding paths. The scene was alive with simple joys, and for once, Miriam and Thomas allowed themselves to be part of it. They found a bench overlooking a small pond and sat down, the quiet sound of water rippling in the breeze. Miriam turned to Thomas, her face glowing with a mixture of happiness and resolve. "I want us to keep doing this," she said. "Not just helping others, but taking time to really be present, to notice the little things." Thomas nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "We've spent so much time chasing big goals that we've forgotten how to enjoy the small moments." Miriam smiled. "Exactly. I don't want to lose sight of those moments again." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We won't, I promise." They sat there for a while, watching the world move around them. For the first time in years, neither felt the need to rush or plan or fixate on what came next. Instead, they allowed themselves to simply be, to feel the warmth of the sun, the rhythm of the city, and the quiet assurance of each other's presence. As they stood to leave, Miriam glanced at the daisies she had tucked into her bag earlier. She plucked one and handed it to Thomas with a teasing smile. "For you, a reminder of what matters." He chuckled, taking the flower and tucking it into his jacket pocket. "I'll keep it close." Hand in hand, they walked back toward their apartment, a shared sense of purpose guiding their steps. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to face it together, with intention, with love, and with the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts could lead to the greatest changes. Don't forget to like if you find this story meaningful to you, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories.